The Guantanamo Bay prison is a U.S.-run detention facility located on the southeastern coast of Cuba. Since the September 11th attacks on the United States, the prison has held a number of terror suspects linked to it and other conflicts. The U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee recently released a report about the CIA's interrogation program. Some of it details the abuse to Gitmo detainees. Joining us now is Washington-based journalist Pablo Pardo of the newspaper El Mundo. He has also written a book detailing prisoner abuse at different prison facilities. Pablo, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Were you surprised about some of the abuse detailed in this U.S. Senate report?
Not at all. I mean, many of these details, they have already been reported in the U.S. media. They've never been confirmed, but they've been around for a very, very long time, more than a decade. And apart from this report that is only focused on the CIA, we have the U.S. Armed Forces, particularly the U.S. Army, but well, also the Navy and other branches of the Armed Forces that have had like a much bigger, let's say, interrogation or detention programs that have included everything that this Senate report mentioned about the CIA. Because we must keep in mind that this report was only about the CIA. It's like everything linked to the Pentagon was off limits.
Well, in your book, you had access to Damien Corsetti, a U.S. soldier involved in the prisoner abuse scandal. And based on your interviews with him, does what he disclosed match this report?
Absolutely. Everything. I mean, it's like the use of waterboarding, the use of all kinds of mistreatment, etc., the humiliation, that's pretty much consistent with everything that is mentioned in this report. Damien gives, in some occasions, like more specific details. The report gives some more details in other instances. But unfortunately, I wasn't surprised at all by what this report said. And to be honest, I think that anyone who followed all these developments in the last 10 to 12 years shouldn't be surprised at all by what the Senate said.
So Corsetti did have some involvement. Why wasn't he convicted in all this?
Basically because he had a very good lawyer. He had two lawyers. The first one he wasn't happy with at all. And the second one, I mean, he comes from a family with long ties to the military, and they put him in touch with a very good lawyer who basically, I mean, gave him a very good and very expensive at the same time. He says that openly. And even if he was indicted for 4 different charges, he got acquitted and he didn't go to prison.
So, you know, a lot of this U.S. Senate intelligence report about the CIA has classified information. You said it's only a small part of what may have occurred over all these years. There's a whole Pentagon area that we don't know about. What more do you think has happened that the general public just simply doesn't know about?
Well, what we know is that this wasn't just limited to around 120 people, as the Senate report says. This was widespread in places like Abu Ghraib or in places like Bagram in Afghanistan. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of prisoners subjected to this treatment. Even nowadays, when the U.S. captures an alleged terrorist in a faraway place, like let's say, for instance, Somalia, they keep him like for 2 or 3 weeks in a U.S. Navy or U.S. Marines ship in the middle of the ocean where he has no rights at all. And then after these 2 or 3 weeks, they call in the lawyers and the legal process starts. So there are like 2 or 3 weeks when this person has no rights at all. So, I mean, we know, for instance, something that Corsetti explains very well is the very first times in Afghanistan, all the prisoners were kept in like collective pens, forced to stay in complete silence for days and days and days with no intimacy, nothing at all. That's, for instance, something that hasn't been reflected in the Senate report. Then the details on sleep deprivation that he gives, for instance, are much tougher. Prisoners who, after 2, 3, 4 days of being without sleeping at all, they started getting literally crazy. One of them started calling his mother, who had died many years ago. So, I mean, there are many kind of very crude details. But let's say from a bureaucratic point of view, like the Senate report, it's like everything's there.
The U.S. and Cuba recently announced that they are working to reestablish ties between their two countries. What do you think this means for the future of Guantanamo Bay?
Well, it's very interesting because both countries, from the very beginning of the opening of the detention facility at Guantanamo, they never argued about Guantanamo. It's very interesting. I mean, Fidel Castro never mentioned Guantanamo, and the Americans, they never put Guantanamo at all in the context of the Cuban relations. Possibly, I mean, we can be a bit cynical and say that Guantanamo is one of the very few things that made the U.S. and the Cuban government agree, or at least not fight about in the last decade. And now, again, Guantanamo is being kept completely outside of the debate. We have to keep in mind that the United States has the right to keep Guantanamo forever, as a part of, I mean, not literally its territory, but under its sovereignty, and just as long as it pays like a symbolic amount of money to the Cuban government. And so far, everybody, I mean, both sides are agreeing on keeping Guantanamo out of the picture. The debate on Guantanamo is much bigger here in the United States about how to shut it down, what to do with it, than in between Cuba and the U.S.
All right, we'll leave it there. Journalist and author Pablo Pardo, thank you so much for joining us here on America's Now.
Thank you very much.